All right, it's been an extremely busy week, like it seems like most all of them are these days. So the last 7 days have been no exception, a lot going on. And as Christians, we always want to analyze and evaluate the news through the lens of a biblical worldview. And that's why I like to always conclude Friday's broadcast with a biblical worldview segment. And for today's segment, there's no shortage of things to talk about, and I'll be addressing it all with David Closson, who, as you know, is the director here at FRC's Center for Biblical Worldview. David, thanks for joining us again. Always great to see you. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Great to be with you, Jody.
Okay, let's start with one of the big ones that we dealt with even just a little while ago. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was killed yesterday by the IDF forces operating in the Gaza Strip. How should Christians respond to this news?
Yeah, in my view, Jody, Christians should respond with gratitude and just be very excited that this happened because Yahya Sinwar, this is a ruthless killer. And we've known this about him for decades, Jody. He's the alleged mastermind behind the horrific October 7th attack that killed 1,200 Israelis. And so I think as Christians looking at this, we need to realize this is a justified state action by the IDF, by the Israeli government. You know, Christians often, when we think about these kinds of issues, want to think about the Christian tradition of just war theory. And one of the things that the Christian just war theory teaches us is that war that is legitimate should never be for reasons of self-aggrandizement, kind of what you see Russia doing with Ukraine, but war that is just is inherently defensive. And what we see going on in the last year since the October 7th attack, Jody, is Israel going after the people and bringing them to justice. And I think that's the way we should respond, realizing this is, in a fallen world where horrible actors exist, we should want to see a measure of justice. And, one thing that I would note, Jody, is, again, this guy has been a bad actor on the world stage for decades. He, back in the late 80s, actually was found guilty for killing IDF soldiers and actually killing Palestinians who he thought were in league with the Israelis. He got the nickname as the Butcher. And so I think this is good news for Israel. This is good news for America. This is good news for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there was just personally a tremendous sigh of relief when that news came through. Let me hit on probably, I'd say probably the next biggest news of the week was Vice President Kamala Harris's interview with on Fox News with Bret Baier. And so many interesting exchanges took place. But one of those was pertained to whether or not Kamala Harris still supported the use of taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition from one gender to the other. And I think, frankly, she tried to dodge the question by claiming that those surgeries were also available during the Trump administration. I'd like to play this clip and get your reaction.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what, you got to take responsible for what happened in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in this presidency.
It's in black and white.
Would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgeries?
I will follow the law.
All right. So what do you think about her answer? And how do you think this affects how people perceive her, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's a non-answer, Jody, and I think the thinking behind the Harris campaign was most polls show that she's beginning to slip, and so they're trying to take some calculated risk, and by going on Fox News, that was a calculated risk. But that was a non-answer, Jody, and so if they think there's kind of a moderate Republican who watches Fox News that they would convince with that answer, it's not going to happen. What's interesting, Jody, is, Kamala Harris likes to say that my values have not changed. And I believe her to some extent on that. I actually pulled up the ACLU questionnaire from 4 years ago when she ran for president the first time. And she was actually asked about this, Jody. And here's actually what she said when she was asked about this question. She said, "It is important that transgender individuals who rely rely on the state for care receive the treatment they need, which includes access to treatment associated with gender transition. That's why, as Attorney General, I pushed the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to provide gender transition surgery to state inmates. I support policies ensuring that federal prisoners and detainees are able to obtain medically necessary care for gender transition, including surgical care while incarcerated or detained. She goes on to say transition treatment is a medical necessity, and I will direct all federal agencies responsible for providing essential medical care to deliver transition treatment. Again, Jody, wow. I think that is just so obvious. This is where she stood a few years ago. She insists, this is her own words, that her values have not changed. I went back actually in a 2019 town hall, again, when she was running for president. She was actually asked, Jody, by a voter, would you support adding a third gender option for federal IDs? And she said yes, and went on to, again, trumpet her support of the whole transgender movement. You know, Jody, last thing I'd say about this, I think Americans are beginning to realize this is extreme, this is dangerous. You know, Christians, we know it's even worse than that, though, that getting on board with transgenderism is actually embracing an inversion of the created order.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's to be honest, and I say this in the right kind of way, you gave a lot better answer for her position than she did with Brett. I mean, you read her own words of what she really believes, while in the interview she tried to skirt around the issue. Yeah. But since we're on this topic of transgenderism, earlier this week, I know you've probably been following this, but FRC, Family Research Council, we filed a brief in an upcoming Supreme Court case known as the United States versus Scarametti. This is the case from Tennessee that centers around a law there that prohibits minors with gender dysphoria from receiving cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers and surgeries, that kind of stuff. What should our audience know about this case, this upcoming case? This is a pretty big deal, isn't it?
It is, and it's a big deal because the nation's highest court has finally agreed to weigh in. This has been all over the lower courts now for the last couple of years. Jody, there's now 21 states that have laws in place that don't allow minor children to get puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, or even these physical surgeries. Jody, these are common sense laws. Before you're 18, you can't get a Tylenol from the school nurse without getting permission from your parents. You can't get a full-time job during the school year. You can't even get a Costco membership. There's all sorts of things you can't do before you turn 18. And this idea that you can make these life-altering decisions, that you can get essentially chemically castrated. Again, people who go through these, their lives are never the same after that. Jody, it's just a nightmare. And there's a whole movement now of detransitioners who went along with these surgeries a few years ago and are realizing that they've ruined their lives, they've ruined their bodies. And so the Supreme Court gets a chance to weigh in on this state law. This one in particular originates from the state of Tennessee, Jody. And, you know, we always say it, but elections have consequences. It's worth noting that as this case began percolating through the courts, the Biden administration, the Justice Department, jumped in and is now defending the folks who are trying to overthrow this law. And again, as Christians, Jody, we just need to realize God in His Word makes it really clear. Male and female, He created them. This idea that you can change your gender, it's, you know, because Christians, our hearts go out to people with gender dysphoria who truly confused by this, but we can't allow activists to rewrite our laws and put our children in danger. And again, this is a really important case, Jody. Oral arguments will be later this fall. We probably won't get a decision until next summer, but it's something to keep watching.
Yeah, we need to keep watching, and we need to encourage people to be praying about this, and that the Supreme Court will have wisdom as they move through this. I mean, they talk about a Pandora's box that could be open when we have more than two genders, or we recognize more than two genders. I mean, where does the insanity stop when you go down that? I also wanted to get your thoughts on this whole transgenderism. It's popping up everywhere, and it has so many different tentacles. This week, for example, Texas Senator Ted Cruz in his challenger in a debate. It came up, and the whole issue of men competing against women on sports teams. And of course, Cruz has been very strong on that. But his opponent now actually has come out with an ad where he says that he doesn't want boys playing girls' sports. So there's an obvious, or at least a very seemingly obvious backpedaling on this issue in that particular race. Is that happening with Democrats across the country? Are they backpedaling? Are they starting to recognize the dangers of this transgenderism, be it in sports or otherwise, or is this just a political move?
Jody, I think it's just politics, and these are politicians doing the types of things that politicians do, unfortunately. We're seeing this in the Ohio Senate race as well. Sherrod Brown, again, the race you just mentioned is in Texas. These are states that are red. It's already going to be kind of an uphill battle for progressive candidates to win these races. And so you're seeing folks like the challenger in Texas, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, kind of coming out and saying that, oh, I'm not in favor of allowing boys to compete on girls' sports teams. I would never be in favor of that. Well, what's interesting is they have voting records, and when they've had a chance to weigh in on it, they've been on the side of the transgender insanity, Jody. And I do think, even though this is politics, I do think we are seeing a movement, a backlash. When you think of LGBT, the T's always been the hard part for the activists to really sell to the American people. Because even in progressive cities, I don't know if you saw it, Jody, but President Trump did a town hall on Fox News with an all-women audience. And I think it was Harris Faulkner asked, how many of you are concerned about boys being put on your girls' athletic teams? And every hand in the room went up. I can't imagine they're all Republicans, Jody. I think this is just a common sense issue. And again, as Christians, we understand when you start tinkering with this, you're tinkering with the very order of creation, the way God has set things up. And so, Jody, I think, again, this is a case probably of politicians being politicians. But I think the fact that they're backpedaling right now does show that even they know some of the positions they're pushing for are not sustainable or palatable to the vast majority of Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. And, all of this comes while we are watching, Americans are watching. The trust in the media has now plummeted to an all-time low. Something that this was even accentuated, I think probably highlighted this week with the CBS News interview with Kamala Harris. And they also had an interview with Speaker Johnson, of course. But I wanted to play a portion of that clip and get your reaction to this. This is Kamala Harris on CBS.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We're not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
I have no idea what that means, but what happened, CBS gave her two chances at the same question. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, and neither one of us actually have any idea what the vice president was trying to communicate there, Jody. And I don't think Americans do either. Unless it's abortion or transgenderism. Well, I guess not transgenderism anymore. She's trying to muddy those waters, too. So really, unless it's abortion, none of us really know what Kamala Harris believes or thinks on any issue. But, Jody, this does speak to an issue that's really important. Trust in our institutions is eroding, whether it's the courts, whether it's our school system, even the military, kind of the last institution that most people said that they thought they could trust. Why is that, Jody? And it's because of decisions that our leaders have made. I'm thinking of the military. Why are recruitment levels so low? Well, think of the woke ideology that's been introduced into our service branches, Jody. Think about the thousands of service members that were discharged because they didn't want to get the COVID-19 shot. Just to even think of medical authorities thinking of COVID, the lack of trust. Think of all of us that were told to wear masks and how none of that was actually based on science. So, bottom line, Jody, as Christians, we believe in an objective order, right and wrong, and we believe in speaking the truth in love. And too often, people in positions of power are abusing their authority, and that is eroding trust we have. And that's not sustainable, Jody, for any society in the long term.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you, I'm just encouraged that the media has now dropped below Congress in having such horrible views from the American people, and which, frankly, it's hard to believe. They've gotten worse than Congress. Director of FRC's Center for Biblical Worldview, David Closson, always great to have you giving us a biblical perspective on what's happening in the news. Thank you. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you, Jody. God bless.